I never told my husband that my father was the chairman of a billion-dollar global corporation. I let him believe my parents were nothing more than retired public servants, quietly scraping by on a modest pension in a forgotten little town in Ohio. That was my first mistake. Or maybe, in the end, it turned out to be the greatest insurance policy I never knew I had. When he kicked open the front door of our Greenwich mansion, his mistress clinging tightly to his arm like a trophy he couldn't wait to show off, he threw an empty suitcase straight at my feet. Her father owns half this town. He smirked, full of a confidence that would not survive the night. So don't you dare make her angry. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply pulled out my phone and sent a single three-letter text that would, before the sun rose, quietly and completely destroy his entire life. Before I continue this story, let me know in the comments below where you're watching from. Hit the like button and subscribe if you've ever had someone mistake your silence for weakness, because that mistake is exactly what this story is about. My name is Audrey. I am 33 years old, and until tonight, I genuinely believed my marriage was simply going through a rough patch, the kind every couple survives if they just try hard enough. That illusion shattered completely and irreversibly the moment the heavy oak door of our Connecticut home slammed violently against the wall. Garrett, my husband of 4 years, marched into the grand foyer like a man storming a castle he already believed he owned. He was not alone. Clinging to his arm was Penelope, a 26-year-old socialite whose face I recognized instantly from every local society magazine, every glossy charity gala photo, every caption dripping with old money and new arrogance. Garrett did not even blink as he hurled a massive canvas suitcase across the polished marble floor. It skidded loudly and slammed into my ankles hard enough to sting. "Pack your things and get out of the primary bedroom tonight," he ordered, his voice bouncing harshly off the high ceilings, echoing through a house I had built with my own 2 hands and my own money. I stood frozen at the base of the grand staircase. My heart pounded heavily against my ribs, fast and furious, but years of high-stakes boardroom training kicked in almost instantly, smoothing my expression into something unreadable, something perfectly, dangerously calm. "You're bringing a strange woman into our house," I said, keeping my voice eerily level, almost clinical. "Not a strange woman," Garrett scoffed, pulling Penelope closer against his side by the waist, as though presenting a prize. "She is my future, and this is my house. You have until midnight to clear out your clothes. Tomorrow, my real partner is moving in." Penelope rolled her eyes dramatically, kicked off her designer heels, and walked right past me as if I were nothing more than the hired help standing in her way. She trailed her manicured fingers along the mahogany console table, visibly cringing at the contact. "Garrett, baby," she whined, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that somehow managed to sound both bored and cruel at once. "We absolutely have to gut this entire place. This interior design screams middle-class catalog. I'm practically allergic to cheap furniture. We're throwing all of her trash out by morning." I watched, in silence, as she dismissed the custom Italian leather sofas and the bespoke artwork I had spent months personally curating, piece by piece, with real thought and real love. Garrett chuckled, wrapping an arm around her shoulder like they were already celebrating. "Don't worry, sweetheart, we'll bring in your top-tier decorators on Monday." Then he turned his cold gaze back to me. "Look, Audrey, let's be adults about this. You had a good run. I gave you a beautiful wedding, a luxury lifestyle, and a roof over your head. You should be thanking me on your knees. You grew up in some nowhere town in Ohio with parents who punched a government clock for a pension. You never belonged in Greenwich high society, and we both know it." I felt a sharp, private pang of irony curl in my chest. Garrett genuinely believed his mid-level executive salary at Thornton Holdings was what funded this incredible lifestyle. He had absolutely no idea that the multi-million-dollar house we were standing in was owned, quietly and completely, by a corporate trust managed strictly by my family. "Do you really think you can just throw me out onto the street with nothing?" I asked, testing the waters, curious to see exactly how deep he would keep digging his own grave tonight. Garrett stepped forward aggressively, jabbing a finger toward my face. "I'm not asking you, Audrey. I'm telling you. Penelope is the beloved daughter of Richard Thornton. Her father is a billionaire real estate developer who owns half the commercial properties in this entire state. He's the exact man holding the keys to my massive promotion next week. If you make a scene, if you try to drag this out in family court, Richard will personally make sure you're ruined. He'll bury you in legal fees until you're begging for spare change on the corner. Don't test us. Leave quietly, and maybe I'll toss you a few thousand to buy a bus ticket back to your poor parents." The sheer audacity of his threat hung heavily in the air, thick and suffocating. He was banking entirely on my supposed poverty to force my total, humiliating submission. He expected loud tears. He expected desperate begging. He wanted me on my knees, pleading for my marriage, for my home, for some scrap of dignity he could dangle in front of me. Instead, I felt a dangerous smile threatening to break across my face, and I suppressed it perfectly, holding my expression carefully blank. Penelope giggled loudly, clearly savoring the power trip of kicking another woman out of her own home. "Come on, Garrett," she purred. "Let her pack her cheap clothes. Pour me a glass of that expensive wine you promised. You know, the exclusive bottle you said you were saving for a very special occasion, to celebrate our new beginning together." Garrett nodded arrogantly, leading her toward the custom glass wine cellar I had meticulously stocked with rare vintages from my father's own personal vineyard. While their backs were turned, I calmly reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. I bypassed my ordinary applications entirely and opened a heavily encrypted corporate security program, one that routed around public cell towers to guarantee absolute privacy. I opened a direct, secure channel to Charles Montgomery, the man Garrett arrogantly believed was a retired civil servant, the man who, in reality, sat as chairman of a billion-dollar global equity firm. I typed exactly 3 words: SOS Greenwich House. I hit send. The delivery confirmation flashed instantly across the screen. I slipped the phone back into my pocket just as Garrett popped the cork on a $4,000 bottle of Cabernet. He poured 2 full glasses of rich red liquid, handing one to Penelope before raising his own in a mocking, triumphant toast in my direction. "Time is ticking, Audrey," he sneered across the room. "Better start folding your little sweaters." I glanced at the towering antique grandfather clock standing sentinel in the hallway, listening to its steady, rhythmic ticking cut through the silent tension of the house. The 10-minute countdown had officially begun, and for the first time all evening I felt something close to peace. I did not have to wait long. Exactly 9 minutes and 45 seconds after I hit send, the heavy silence of our affluent neighborhood was shattered completely. The aggressive screech of high-performance tires echoed up our long driveway, followed immediately by the blinding glare of high-intensity headlights sweeping violently across the front living room windows. 3 unmarked matte black sport utility vehicles blocked the main entrance. Heavy car doors slammed shut in perfect practiced unison. The massive oak front door, which Garrett had carelessly left slightly ajar during his dramatic entrance moments before, was suddenly pushed wide open. 5 men in pristine, dark, tailored suits stepped simultaneously into the grand marble foyer, moving with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency that spoke of years of elite tactical training. Garrett straightened up completely, puffing out his chest to assert some last shred of dominance. He set his crystal wine glass down on the marble counter with a smug little clink and looked directly at me, a cruel grin stretching wide across his face. "Well, Audrey, it looks like Penelope's father works even faster than I thought. I specifically told you not to mess with Richard Thornton. He clearly sent his private corporate fixers to make absolutely sure you leave this property without putting up a fight. You really should have just packed your bags when I gave you the chance." Penelope giggled maliciously, stepping in close behind Garrett and wrapping her thin arms tightly around his waist. "Oh, Daddy is just so fiercely protective of me," she cooed, letting her voice echo deliberately off the high ceilings. "He probably bought the mortgage on this entire estate 20 minutes ago just to kick you out onto the street. Do what the intimidating men say, Audrey. Don't embarrass yourself any further." I stood perfectly still at the base of the grand staircase, watching the tactical team spread out with quiet precision across the entrance hall. They were absolutely not Richard Thornton's men. These men belonged, exclusively and completely, to the elite shadow tier of Montgomery Global's Executive Protection Division. I recognized the broad-shouldered man leading the detail immediately, a highly decorated former military intelligence officer who had managed my family's private security for well over a decade, a man who had once carried me on his shoulders at a company picnic when I was 9 years old. Garrett stepped forward confidently, extending his right hand toward the towering security chief as though welcoming a subordinate business partner into his own home. "Gentlemen, I'm Garrett, the man of the house. Thank you for handling this messy situation so promptly. My soon-to-be ex-wife is just about to head upstairs to gather her cheap clothes and pack her things. Feel free to physically escort her to the curb if she gives you any trouble." The chief of security did not even glance at Garrett's outstretched hand. He did not break his commanding stride for a single fraction of a second. He walked straight past my stunned husband and stopped exactly 2 feet in front of where I stood. To Garrett's absolute shock, the towering man bowed his head deeply and respectfully. "Good evening, Miss Montgomery," the chief said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that instantly commanded the attention of the entire room. "The primary extraction team is fully ready. We've successfully secured the outer perimeter of the estate." I nodded slowly, maintaining my perfectly composed facade even as a quiet warmth spread through my chest. "Thank you. Please proceed with the standard operational protocol." Garrett's hand dropped immediately, his smug smile faltering rapidly into a mask of pure confusion. "Miss Montgomery? What on earth are you talking about? Her last name is my last name. Who the hell are you people, and how did you get past the front gate? If Richard Thornton didn't personally send you here tonight, then you're trespassing on my private property, and I'll have every single one of you arrested." The security chief turned slowly to face Garrett, his expression entirely devoid of emotion, carved from something colder than stone. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and produced a thick, meticulously detailed legal document printed on heavy cardstock. He held it out toward Garrett, not as a friendly offering, but as a devastating legal weapon aimed squarely between his eyes. "This luxury property does not belong to you, sir," the chief stated coldly, leaving no room whatsoever for argument. "It is wholly and legally owned by the Montgomery Global Corporate Trust. You currently reside here under a conditional executive lease agreement, heavily subsidized by the firm itself." Garrett scoffed loudly, snatching the paper from the man's hand with shaking fingers. "That's insane and factually incorrect. I pay the monthly mortgage directly out of my Thornton Holdings executive salary." The chief remained completely expressionless. "You pay a heavily reduced fractional lease to the holding company, and per Section 4, Paragraph B, of your signed housing agreement, the trust retains the absolute legal right to terminate your residency immediately, without any prior notice, in the direct event of moral turpitude or actions that publicly disgrace the firm. Bringing a mistress into a trust-owned property strictly and explicitly violates that morality clause. Your conditional tenancy is officially terminated, effective immediately." Garrett stared down at the document, his eyes darting frantically across the dense legal jargon and the undeniable corporate seal stamped at the bottom of the page. This is a sick joke. You can't legally evict me in the middle of the night without a court order. I have tenant rights in this state. I have money. I have lawyers. Penelope stepped forward angrily, jabbing a manicured finger toward the men. Do you have any idea who my father is? My father will buy your little security company tomorrow morning and fire every single one of you. I calmly pulled my phone out of my coat pocket, my eyes locked onto Penelope's furious, reddening face. I don't think your father can actually afford it, Penelope, I said flatly, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. I smoothly opened the encrypted banking application linked directly to Garrett's corporate accounts and tapped a single red button on the screen. Across the room, Garrett's phone chimed violently with an urgent alert. He hastily yanked it from his pocket, the color draining from his face as he read the automated notification. His primary corporate credit card, secretly underwritten the whole time by Montgomery Global's vast equity partnerships, was instantly and permanently frozen. His available balance dropped to zero in a fraction of a second. "What did you just do?" he demanded, raw panic finally cracking his once arrogant facade wide open. Before he could even finish the desperate question, the automated voice of the advanced smart home system chimed loudly through the integrated ceiling speakers. Security protocols fully engaged. All perimeter access codes have been permanently reset. Master override initiated. The security chief casually gestured to the men behind him. Escort them off the premises immediately. Two massive security officers swiftly grabbed Garrett by the arms while a third took a firm hold of Penelope by her elbow. "Hey, let go of me right now," Garrett shouted, struggling pointlessly against their iron grips. "My winter coat is upstairs. My car keys are in the kitchen." The chief entirely ignored his protests. "Any personal belongings legally deemed yours will be securely shipped to an address of your choosing within 5 to 7 business days. Until then, you are legally barred from setting foot on this property." The officers dragged them both toward the open front door. Penelope shrieked at the top of her lungs, stumbling awkwardly in her designer heels as she was forcefully pulled across the marble threshold and out into the night. The cold Connecticut rain was coming down in freezing sheets, the ambient temperature hovering dangerously just above the freezing point. They were thrust out onto the wet, unforgiving driveway, shivering instantly in their thin evening wear, exposed and helpless in a way neither of them had ever experienced before. The heavy oak front door slammed shut behind them, locking automatically with a satisfying, final metallic click, leaving them completely stranded in the middle of the storm. I watched through the reinforced security glass as Garrett and Penelope ran desperately down the long driveway, the freezing rain soaking through their expensive clothes within seconds. They were forced to call an overpriced rideshare from the main gate, shivering uncontrollably in the torrential downpour, all their former swagger washed away with the rain. I knew exactly where they were heading. Garrett only had one safe haven when his massive ego was bruised, and that was the suffocating embrace of his mother, Deanna. She lived in a quaint suburban home about 20 minutes away, a home she constantly bragged about, funded, as she believed, entirely through her son's incredible corporate success. Less than 45 minutes later, my phone vibrated aggressively against the marble kitchen counter. The caller ID flashed Deanna's name in bright red letters. I calmly picked up the device and answered, pulling the phone away from my ear as her shrill voice blasted through the speaker. "Audrey, what is wrong with you?" Deanna screamed at the absolute top of her lungs, skipping any pretense of a greeting. "You vindictive, psychotic woman. Garrett just walked into my house completely drenched and freezing because you hired some rogue security thugs to illegally kick him out of his own home. He's shivering in my hallway right now." I could hear Garrett muttering angrily in the background, likely wrapping himself in a warm blanket while Penelope complained loudly about her ruined designer hair and her chipped manicure. "You're nothing but a gold-digging manipulator," Deanna continued, her voice dripping with pure venom and decades of unchecked entitlement. My son worked his fingers to the bone to build his self-made success. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps to give you a luxury life you never deserved. You rode his coattails for 4 years, spending his hard-earned money. And the second he finally finds a woman who actually matches his social status, you try to steal his real estate. You're absolute trash, Audrey. I always told him he should never have married a poor girl from Ohio. You people only know how to leech off the greatness of others. I listened to her furious tirade without interrupting, calmly pouring myself a glass of sparkling water. When she finally paused to catch her breath, I leaned back against the counter. Deanna, I said softly, my voice cutting through her hysteria like a razor blade. Did Garrett tell you who actually owns the house he was just evicted from? There was a brief, telling silence on the line before Deanna scoffed loudly. He told me you used some illegal corporate loophole to temporarily lock him out, but his lawyers will fix that tomorrow morning. You can't steal a house he pays for. I smiled, taking a slow sip of my water. Garrett doesn't own that house, Deanna. He never has. Montgomery Global owns it, and my family owns Montgomery Global. My father is the chairman. You know, the poor public servant from Ohio. Deanna laughed mockingly, an ugly, grating sound. You're delusional. You're making up insane lies because you're desperate and jealous of Penelope. I set my glass down firmly on the counter. Let's talk about who the real leech is, Deanna. Let's talk about your beautiful suburban home, the one with the freshly painted wraparound porch and the newly renovated kitchen. Let's talk about your premium, platinum-tier health insurance that covers your expensive weekly physical therapy sessions. For the last 5 years, you have proudly told every single person in your neighborhood that your highly successful son pays for all of it. You've bragged at your book club about how Garrett gives you a $4,000 monthly allowance to cover your mortgage and your medical bills. I heard Garrett's voice spike in the background, a sudden note of genuine panic bleeding into his tone as he tried to grab the phone away from his mother. "Mom, hang up the phone right now," he hissed urgently, but Deanna was far too arrogant to listen. "Yes, he does," she yelled proudly over the speaker, "because he is a good, loyal son who takes care of his family, something you know absolutely nothing about." I let out a cold, hard laugh. Garrett hasn't given you a single dime since the day we got married. His mid-level salary barely covers his expensive suits and his ridiculous sports car lease. I am the one who has been secretly paying your $4,000 mortgage every single month for half a decade. I am the one funding your premium health insurance out of my own private trust fund. Garrett begged me to do it because he was drowning in high-interest credit card debt, taking out predatory personal loans just to keep up his rich executive facade. He cried in our living room 3 months after our wedding, terrified you'd find out he was functionally broke. He wanted you to think he was a self-made millionaire, and I protected his fragile ego for years. I set up the wire transfers under a dummy corporate name, so you would think the money came directly from his employer. I bankrolled your entire comfortable retirement, Deanna. Every grocery run, every vacation to Florida, every single copay for your endless doctor visits, all funded by the exact same poor girl from Ohio you just insulted. "You are a filthy liar!" Deanna shrieked, her voice cracking with pure denial and rising panic. "My son makes 6 figures. He would never take a handout from a pathetic nobody like you. I will not listen to these disgusting fabrications for another second. Garrett, tell this crazy woman she's lying." But Garrett said nothing at all. The heavy, guilty silence radiating down the phone line was confirmation enough for everyone listening. "Suit yourself, Deanna," I replied evenly. Walking over to my laptop on the kitchen island, I opened it and logged into my secure private banking portal. If you're so entirely confident that your son is the one financing your perfect little life, then you won't mind if I stop my contributions immediately. I clicked into the Scheduled Transfers tab, located the $4,000 recurring payment labeled Deanna, Mortgage, and hit the red cancellation button. The system prompted me for confirmation. I clicked Confirm. Done, I announced calmly. The autopay on your mortgage has been permanently canceled. Deanna gasped loudly. What are you doing? Stop it right now. I then opened the health insurance administrative portal linked to my family office, navigated to her premium dependent policy, and clicked Revoke Coverage, selecting divorce proceedings as the qualifying life event. Done, I said again. Your Platinum health insurance policy is officially terminated, effective at midnight tonight. The cost of your physical therapy tomorrow morning will be entirely out of pocket. Good luck having your self-made son cover it with his frozen Thornton Holdings credit card. Audrey, wait! Deanna screamed, her previous arrogance evaporating completely into raw, naked terror. You can't do this to me. I'm a senior citizen. I need that insurance for my back. Garrett, do something. Tell her to turn it back on. Make her fix it. I listened calmly to the chaotic sound of Deanna crying hysterically and Garrett shouting in sheer frustration, the two of them only now beginning to grasp the full, staggering severity of his financial ruin. His perfect little safety net was, in the space of about 90 seconds, entirely and permanently gone. Before either of them could utter another pathetic threat or try to negotiate their way out of the disaster they had built with their own hands, I pressed the red button on my screen and hung up, cutting off their panicked screaming mid-sentence. I blocked her number immediately, without a shred of hesitation. I stood alone in my beautiful, quiet kitchen, pouring my untouched wine slowly down the sink. The house was blissfully silent once again, and for the first time in 4 years, the air inside it finally felt clean, like something poisonous had just been aired out of every room. While I enjoyed the absolute peace of my reclaimed home, an entirely different scene was rapidly unfolding 20 minutes away in Deanna's suffocating suburban living room. Clara, Garrett's younger sister, had arrived with her husband, Malik Washington. Malik was 35, a brilliant black man who had built a fierce reputation as a top corporate litigation attorney, the only person Garrett had ever genuinely felt threatened by, and for good reason. Garrett paced furiously across his mother's cheap carpet in his damp clothes. Penelope sobbed loudly on the sofa, clutching a cup of hot tea and complaining bitterly about her ruined evening. When Malik walked through the front door, Garrett didn't even bother with a hello. He aggressively shoved the crumpled Montgomery Global eviction notice into Malik's chest. "Read this," Garrett demanded. Audrey completely lost her mind. She used some fake corporate loophole to lock me out of my own house and froze my credit cards. I want you to file a massive lawsuit against her first thing tomorrow morning. I want to sue her for extreme emotional distress, illegal eviction, and maximum spousal support. I want half of every single dollar she has hidden away in her little bank accounts. Malik did not flinch. He slowly took the wrinkled document, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose, and read the eviction notice in total silence, his sharp eyes tracing the dense legal terminology and the undeniable corporate watermark stamped at the bottom of the page. Then, to Garrett's absolute horror, Malik started to laugh. A deep, genuine laugh of pure disbelief. "You want me to sue the Montgomery Global Corporate Trust over a violently breached morality clause?" Malik asked, his voice dripping with intense professional amusement. "Are you actually insane, Garrett? You brought your mistress into a property owned by an irrevocable corporate trust. You essentially handed them the legal right to execute a zero-tolerance eviction on a silver platter. You have absolutely no case whatsoever." Garrett's face turned a violent crimson, his already battered ego now completely shattered. He pointed a shaking finger right at Malik's face. "You know what your problem is?" Garrett snarled, stepping dangerously close. You think because you wear a fancy suit you understand high society law. But you're nothing but a diversity hire at a mid-level firm. You don't understand how real wealth operates. Penelope's father is a billionaire. He plays in a league you couldn't even dream of. I'm telling you to find a way to crush Audrey, or I'll find a real lawyer who actually knows what they're doing. The room went dead silent. Clara gasped loudly, stepping forward to defend her husband against her own brother's blatant racism, but Malik gently held up a hand to stop her. His expression shifted in an instant, from amused to absolutely glacial. He looked at Garrett with the kind of clinical detachment reserved for an insect about to be crushed underfoot. Let me educate you on how real wealth actually operates, Garrett, Malik said, his voice dangerously low and completely steady. This document is not some standard residential lease you can easily dispute in small claims court. It is a bulletproof contract drafted by a Tier 1 wealth management firm. The trust explicitly protects its primary beneficiary, which is quite clearly your wife. You willingly signed a heavily subsidized tenancy agreement with a remarkably strict morality clause, and then openly committed infidelity on the premises. You broke federal contract law attached to the corporate trust. If you foolishly try to drag Audrey into family court, her corporate lawyers won't just bankrupt you, they will legally mandate that you rapidly repay every single cent of the subsidized rent you've enjoyed for the last 4 years. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in immediate unpayable debt. You are not a high society player, Garrett. You are a severely indebted mid-level manager who just destroyed his only financial safety net because his own arrogance blinded his basic common sense. Garrett threw a massive tantrum, kicking the coffee table and screaming that Malik was completely useless. While Deanna frantically rushed over to comfort her raging son, Malik calmly stepped back into the shadows of the hallway and pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. He had seen enough tonight to know exactly which side of this war he intended to stand on. My phone screen suddenly lit up with an encrypted text from Malik. I'm standing in Deanna's living room, the message read. Garrett just confessed everything. I told him he has absolutely zero legal standing to touch you. I'm completely with you on this, Audrey. I smiled, typing back a quick thank you. A second, much longer message appeared moments later, and it sent a sudden, thrilling shockwave through my entire plan. Listen, Malik wrote, I've been doing some independent digging into Garrett's recent projects. I noticed some highly suspicious discrepancies in his corporate accounts at Thornton Holdings, gaps in vendor billing, unaccounted wire transfers, shell company routing. I think he and Richard Thornton are actively embezzling project funds. Garrett is too stupid to cover his tracks properly. Give me 24 hours. I'm going to run a deep shadow audit on his entire division. If I find what I think I'm going to find, you won't just get a clean divorce. You'll have the exact ammunition you need to send both him and his billionaire future father-in-law straight to federal prison. Tell me if I should pull the trigger. I stared at the bright screen, the corners of my mouth slowly curling into a dangerous, victorious smile. Garrett thought he could use his mistress's wealthy father to permanently ruin my life. He had no idea his own brother-in-law was about to hand me the ultimate weapon to burn their entire fake empire straight to the ground. I typed one word and hit send. Proceed. While I settled into the luxurious penthouse suite of the Four Seasons in downtown Manhattan, Penelope was busy throwing the temper tantrum of the century. According to the voicemails Garrett left on my blocked number, which my security team dutifully transcribed for me, Penelope had sobbed uncontrollably the entire ride back to her father's sprawling estate. She barged into Richard Thornton's private home office, still shivering in her ruined designer dress, and demanded absolute vengeance. Richard Thornton was a billionaire real estate developer who operated under the arrogant, unshakable assumption that his massive wealth allowed him to rewrite the law whenever it suited him. Seeing his precious daughter in tears because some supposedly poor public servant's daughter had bested her sent him into a blind, incandescent rage. He promised Penelope he would crush me financially before the sun came up. True to his word, Richard bypassed every standard legal procedure and made a single phone call to a regional bank manager he had securely tucked into his pocket. He demanded the immediate freezing of the joint checking account Garrett and I shared, fully assuming this account held my entire life savings. He believed freezing $50,000 would leave me destitute, unable to hire a decent lawyer or even pay for a hotel room. He wanted me crawling back to Garrett, begging for mercy, so Penelope could laugh in my face one final time. He had absolutely no idea that the $50,000 sitting in that regional bank account was nothing more than a decoy. A small, everyday household fund I used for groceries and utility bills. My actual wealth, sitting safely and quietly inside the Montgomery Global Offshore Trusts, remained entirely untouchable, entirely out of his reach. The sheer audacity of his move was, frankly, almost sweet in its desperation, and it would prove, by morning, to be the single worst financial decision Richard Thornton had ever made in his life. Richard truly believed that cutting off a joint checking account would bring me straight to my knees. He wanted to break my spirit before the legal battle even properly began, if only to prove to Penelope, once and for all, that her father was the undisputed king of Connecticut. I was enjoying a cup of artisanal coffee on my hotel balcony overlooking Central Park when the automated banking alert flashed across my phone screen. Your joint checking account has been temporarily suspended due to suspicious activity. Please contact your branch manager immediately. I did not panic. Instead, I let out a soft, genuine laugh, the kind that comes from watching an amateur try to outmaneuver someone who has already won. Richard Thornton had just handed me a federal crime on a silver platter. Unlawfully freezing a bank account without a court order was a severe violation of banking regulations, and he had done it with his own name attached, proudly, to the request. I walked back inside my suite and sat down at the mahogany desk. I opened the recording software on my secure laptop, linked it to my phone, and dialed the direct number of the regional branch manager, a man named Gregory Stevens. When Gregory answered, his voice dripped with the kind of patronizing sympathy reserved specifically for women he assumed were already defeated. "Mrs. Audrey, I am so deeply sorry," he lied smoothly. "We noticed some irregular withdrawal attempts and had to place a hard freeze on the funds, purely for your own protection. You'll need to come down to the branch next week with Mr. Garrett to resolve this." I let my voice tremble slightly, playing the part of the terrified, helpless housewife they so desperately wanted me to be. "Please, Gregory," I begged convincingly. "I'm locked out of my house. I need that money to pay for a cheap motel and some food. Can you just release a few $100s?" Gregory sighed heavily. "I wish I could help you, Audrey, but my hands are completely tied. This order came from the very top." I paused, letting the silence stretch out long enough to become uncomfortable, forcing him to fill the void himself. "The very top of the bank?" I asked innocently. Gregory, eager to show off his powerful connections and, no doubt hoping to intimidate me further into submission, took the bait instantly. "The order came directly from Mr. Richard Thornton," he said proudly. "He's one of our largest institutional investors. He specifically requested the freeze regarding his future son-in-law's assets. There's absolutely nothing I can do until he gives the green light." I smiled coldly, my trembling act vanishing in an instant. "Thank you for clarifying that, Gregory," I said, my voice suddenly sharp and commanding, all traces of helplessness gone. "Have a wonderful day." I disconnected the call and immediately saved the audio file properly, securing yet another piece of damning digital evidence of their blatant, careless financial tampering. Scarcely an hour after I had trapped the corrupt bank manager into confessing on the record, another notification popped up on my laptop screen. It was a heavily encrypted email from Malik Washington, the attachment a massive zip file containing hundreds of digitized documents. I entered the decryption key Malik had provided and opened the main folder. I spent the next 3 hours meticulously reviewing the contents, and my jaw tightened with a kind of righteous anger I hadn't fully allowed myself to feel until that moment. Malik had delivered an absolute gold mine of corporate espionage. He had bypassed Thornton Holdings' internal firewalls entirely and pulled the raw financial data from Garrett's supposedly successful real estate division. The documents painted a crystal-clear picture of coordinated wire fraud. Garrett and Richard Thornton had been systematically embezzling millions of dollars from private investors, funneling the cash through a complex web of anonymous shell companies scattered across the Cayman Islands. They were artificially inflating project costs, approving fake contractor invoices, and quietly pocketing the massive difference between what was billed and what was real. Even worse, several of the investors they were actively stealing from were prominent partners within the Montgomery Global Network. Garrett was not, and had never been, a brilliant executive. He was a reckless criminal, stealing directly from my own family's business associates to fund his lavish lifestyle and impress his billionaire mistress. Malik had meticulously highlighted the most damning wire transfers, clearly showing Garrett's digital signature authorizing illegal movements of capital right alongside Richard Thornton's direct approvals. It was undeniable, airtight proof of a massive federal crime. They were not looking at some minor corporate fine or a slap on the wrist. They were looking at decades in federal prison for conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering. I sat back in the plush leather chair of my hotel suite, letting it all settle. Garrett had threatened to ruin me with his powerful connections. Penelope had threatened to throw my belongings into the street. Deanna had called me a gold-digging parasite. They all genuinely believed I was weak, poor, and utterly defenseless. I carefully compiled the audio recording of the corrupt bank manager alongside Malik's devastating financial audit into one highly secure digital dossier. I now had every piece of ammunition I needed to completely decimate them. The only thing left to do was wait patiently for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. That perfect moment arrived 48 hours later. I received a formal legal summons to a highly publicized glass-walled conference room at a premier law firm in Midtown Manhattan. The firm occupied the 60th floor, offering a sweeping, arrogant view of the entire New York City skyline. They were known exclusively for representing the ruthless corporate elite, the kind of attorneys who billed thousands of dollars by the minute and specialized in destroying the lives of ex-spouses without a second thought or a moment's hesitation. I arrived exactly on time, wearing a sharply tailored conservative beige suit, carrying nothing but a single slim leather portfolio. When a paralegal escorted me into the massive conference room, the visual hierarchy of the space was instantly and aggressively clear. Garrett and Penelope sat closely together on one side of a long, polished mahogany table, looking incredibly smug, dressed in coordinating high-end designer outfits, acting as though they had already won some grand, inevitable lottery. Beside them sat their heavily compensated lead attorney, a slick, aggressive man named Mr. Bradley, whose perfectly gelled hair and bespoke silk tie screamed manufactured intimidation from across the room. I sat down across from them, maintaining perfect posture and an entirely unreadable, neutral expression. Mr. Bradley didn't even bother offering a polite greeting or a professional handshake. He immediately reached into his thick leather briefcase and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents, slamming the heavy binder down onto the center of the mahogany table with a loud, violent thud that echoed sharply off the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, clearly designed to make me flinch. He slid the binder across the smooth wooden surface until it stopped directly in front of my hands. It ran over 80 pages of dense legal maneuvering, drafted specifically to leave me entirely destitute. "This is the finalized marital settlement agreement," Mr. Bradley stated, his voice carrying the practiced, cruel boredom of a man who crushed vulnerable women for a living and considered it barely worth his attention. "My client is offering you a highly streamlined divorce process today, provided you comply fully with every single demand listed within these pages, without any argument." I looked down at the heavy document but did not reach out to touch it. I kept my eyes fixed directly on Garrett. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, crossing his arms arrogantly over his chest. "I'm not playing games with you anymore, Audrey," Garrett said, his tone dripping with absolute sickening condescension. "You were a convenient placeholder for a while, a starter wife who simply couldn't keep up with my rising professional trajectory. That document permanently strips away any claim you think you have to my corporate assets, my future earnings, my real estate portfolio, and my retirement accounts. You're walking away with exactly what you brought into this marriage, which is absolutely nothing." "Furthermore," he continued, clearly enjoying the sound of his own voice, "there's a strict, ironclad non-disclosure agreement woven directly into the fabric of the settlement. You are legally bound to absolute total silence regarding my relationship with Penelope. If you even breathe a single word of our affair to the press, to our mutual acquaintances, or on any social media platform, Mr. Bradley here will ruthlessly sue you for defamation and bankrupt whatever pathetic future you try to build for yourself." Garrett leaned forward, placing his elbows heavily on the table, a greedy, ecstatic light shining brightly in his eyes. "You see, Audrey, my life is about to change forever," he bragged, unable to contain his massive ego for even a single sentence. "Next week is the highly exclusive Montgomery Global Gala. It's the most elite financial event of the entire decade. The press will be there. The Wall Street elite will be there. Richard Thornton, my future father-in-law, is officially signing a $200 million joint venture directly with the chairman of the firm. I'm being publicly named the primary executive director of that massive project. That signature is going to permanently cement my status in the billionaire class. I'm moving into a league of unimaginable power, a world you can't even begin to comprehend. Having a bitter, poor ex-wife spreading messy rumors is bad for my new corporate brand, and I simply will not tolerate it. Sign the papers and disappear." Before I could even respond to his ridiculous, wildly inflated delusions of grandeur, Penelope decided it was her turn to exert dominance over the room. She slammed her perfectly manicured hands flat against the mahogany table and leaned aggressively across the expensive wood, her face stopping just inches from mine. Her massive diamond engagement ring, undoubtedly purchased with the very funds Garrett had been quietly embezzling, flashed violently under the bright fluorescent lights. She smelled heavily of expensive perfume and thoroughly unearned confidence. "You are going to sign that document today, Audrey," Penelope hissed, dropping the sweet socialite act completely and revealing the vicious, spoiled child lurking just beneath the surface. "Don't even think you can drag this out in court to try and negotiate some better financial payout. You don't have the money to fight our lawyers, and your frozen little checking account proves it. If you refuse to sign away your rights right here and right now, I will personally make sure you never work a single day in your life again." Penelope glared at me, her eyes wide with malicious, unrestrained intent. "My father holds massive influence over every major financial institution from Wall Street all the way to Boston. One single phone call from Richard Thornton, and you will be permanently blacklisted from every corporate firm, every banking job, and every accounting office on the entire East Coast. I will call in every favor my family has. I will spread horrific rumors about your sheer incompetence and your unstable mental health. You won't even be able to get a job pouring coffee in the financial district. You will be completely and utterly erased from the industry. Sign the papers, crawl back to your little farm town in Ohio, and be grateful we're even letting you walk away without destroying what little dignity you have left. Do I make myself perfectly clear? The sheer staggering level of their combined arrogance was genuinely something to witness. They were so utterly blinded by their own perceived power and wealth that they completely failed to realize they were walking, quite blindly, straight into a devastating and inescapable trap. Garrett was loudly bragging about securing a $200 million deal with Montgomery Global, entirely unaware that the elusive chairman he so desperately wanted to impress was the very same father I had supposedly hidden away in Ohio all along. Penelope was busy threatening to blacklist me from the entire financial sector, completely oblivious to the plain fact that my family essentially owned the sector she was so proud of. I looked down at the aggressive settlement document sitting quietly in front of me. I did not show a single ounce of fear or intimidation. Instead, I slowly reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out a sleek black fountain pen, calmly preparing to execute a legal maneuver that their overpriced, overconfident lawyer was entirely too arrogant to see coming. I let my shoulders slump forward a fraction of an inch, carefully manufacturing the posture of a completely defeated woman, and I allowed a heavy, trembling sigh to escape my lips, playing directly into their twisted little superiority complex. Mr. Bradley smiled a predatory, satisfied smile, utterly convinced that his aggressive tactics had effectively broken my spirit in a matter of minutes. Garrett leaned back in his chair, whispering something into Penelope's ear that made her giggle maliciously. They were so busy celebrating their premature victory that none of them paid the slightest attention to what my hands were actually doing. I opened the massive leather binder and began turning the heavy pages of the marital settlement agreement, making a deliberate show of looking overwhelmed by the dense legal jargon, occasionally pausing to rub my temples as if a severe headache were setting in. In reality, my eyes were scanning the paragraphs with lethal, practiced precision. I was looking for one very specific section buried deep within the financial addendum, a standard liability distribution clause. When I reached page 72, I found exactly what I needed: a boilerplate paragraph detailing the division of shared marital debts. I uncapped my sleek black fountain pen. The ink inside had been specifically chosen to flawlessly match the printed text of the document. Under the guise of initialing the bottom margin, I swiftly and smoothly inserted a highly technical legal amendment directly into the post-nuptial liability clause. It was a single, densely worded sentence stating that the secondary spouse was indemnified and legally isolated from any undisclosed corporate liabilities, pending federal investigations and financial fraud committed by the primary earner prior to the finalized date of separation. It was a small masterclass in legal maneuvering, effectively ensuring that when the federal government eventually came to collect the millions of dollars Garrett had stolen, they would not be able to touch a single penny of my hidden wealth to cover his criminal restitution. I continued turning the pages, pretending to read through the final custody sections regarding our shared assets. Mr. Bradley loudly cleared his throat, clearly annoyed by how long I was taking. "Are we quite finished here, Audrey?" the lawyer asked condescendingly, checking his heavy gold Rolex. "I have a very important lunch meeting with the senior partners in 20 minutes, and I'd really prefer not to waste any more billable time on a completely straightforward, zero-asset divorce." I looked up at him, widening my eyes slightly to project a careful, calculated naivety. "I just want to make sure I understand this correctly, Mr. Bradley," I said, keeping my voice soft and hesitant. "Does this mean I'm entirely surrendering any right to Garrett's future corporate bonuses at Thornton Holdings?" Garrett burst out laughing, a cruel, echoing sound that filled the glass room from wall to wall. "You really are thick, Audrey. Yes, that's exactly what it means. You get absolutely nothing. Not my bonuses, not my real estate, not my investments. You're walking out of here with nothing but the clothes on your back. Just sign the damn paper so we can all move on with our lives." I lowered my head slightly, hiding the razor-sharp smile that threatened to break across my face. I flipped to the final signature page, pressed the nib of my fountain pen against the thick paper, and signed my name with smooth, practiced elegance. I pushed the heavy binder back across the mahogany table. Mr. Bradley snatched it up immediately. Blinded by his own extreme arrogance and deeply ingrained condescension, he didn't even bother to flip back through the pages to check my initials. He simply saw my signature on the final line, assumed I was far too uneducated or too broken to alter his supposedly flawless contract, and shoved the binder carelessly back into his leather briefcase. He had absolutely no idea that his lazy, dismissive oversight had just legally severed me from one of the largest impending federal fraud indictments in Connecticut real estate history. By officially accepting my signature on that quietly altered document, Mr. Bradley had just legally guaranteed that Garrett alone would absorb 100% of the criminal and civil liabilities for his massive embezzlement scheme. Garrett stood up from his leather chair, practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. He aggressively buttoned his expensive tailored suit jacket, looking down at me as if I were nothing more than an unpleasant stain on the bottom of his shoe. "Good luck out there in the real world, Audrey," he sneered loudly. "Maybe you can move back into your childhood bedroom in Ohio and get a job bagging groceries." Penelope stood up beside him, looping her thin arm through his. "Don't bother using us as a professional reference," she added maliciously, flipping her perfectly styled blonde hair over her shoulder. "We simply don't associate with the lower class anymore." I stood up slowly, smoothing the non-existent wrinkles from my beige skirt. I did not say a single word in response to their pathetic, childish insults. I simply picked up my leather portfolio, turned on my heel, and walked calmly out of the glass-walled conference room, holding my head high as I marched down the polished hallway and stepped into the private executive elevator. The moment the heavy steel doors slid shut, completely isolating me from the law firm, my composed facade melted into a fiercely triumphant grin. I pulled my encrypted phone from my pocket, opened my private email application, and attached the massive digital dossier Malik had compiled, containing every single piece of undeniable evidence proving Garrett and Richard Thornton's federal wire fraud. I typed in the highly secure direct email address for the chairman of the board of Montgomery Global, my father. In the subject line, I typed one devastating word: checkmate. I hit send and watched the progress bar shoot instantly across the screen. The trap was now permanently, irreversibly set. The legal protections were ironclad, and the final countdown to their absolute destruction had officially, quietly begun. The morning before the highly anticipated Montgomery Global Gala arrived with a crisp, biting chill in the Manhattan air. I woke up in my luxurious hotel suite feeling an overwhelming sense of absolute calm. The trap was perfectly set. The legal documents were completely bulletproof, and the massive financial fraud dossier was safely in the hands of my father. All that remained now was preparing for the final public execution of their fake little empire. I left the hotel and took a brisk, refreshing walk down Fifth Avenue, enjoying the vibrant energy of the city around me. My destination was an ultra-exclusive, appointment-only haute couture boutique known strictly for serving international royalty and elite Wall Street dynasty families. For the past 4 years, I had deliberately dressed down, buying basic off-the-rack clothing and pretending to hunt for bargain discounts, all just to stroke Garrett's fragile ego and protect his deep financial insecurities. He always needed to feel like the primary provider, the big corporate winner rescuing his poor wife from a life of mediocrity. Today, that pathetic, suffocating charade was completely, finally over. I was reclaiming my true identity, stepping confidently back into the elite world I was born to navigate and, when necessary, dominate. I pushed open the heavy brass doors of the boutique and stepped into the hushed, velvet-lined showroom. The store manager, A highly sophisticated fashion director named Antoine greeted me instantly by my actual family name. "Good morning, Miss Montgomery," he said, with a warm and incredibly respectful bow. "Your gala gown has been perfectly tailored to your exact measurements and is waiting for you in the private VIP suite." I followed him past rows of breathtaking designer clothing to a secluded back room, where an absolute masterpiece of modern fashion hung suspended under a brilliant, focused spotlight. It was a custom $30,000 gown, crafted from the absolute finest midnight black European silk. The bodice was adorned with intricate, hand-sewn onyx beading that caught the light fiercely with every subtle movement. It was not merely a beautiful dress. It was a flawless suit of custom armor, designed specifically for corporate warfare and public destruction. The massive invoice for the garment had already been discreetly settled by my private family trust account months earlier, long before Garrett had ever foolishly decided to kick me out of my own home. I ran my fingers over the cold, heavy silk, feeling a massive surge of pure adrenaline run through my veins. When I stepped onto the gala red carpet the following night, there would be absolutely no doubt left in anyone's mind about who actually held the real power in the state of Connecticut. Antoine carefully zipped the heavy, luxurious gown into an opaque, weather-resistant garment bag bearing the boutique's prestigious golden logo, and handed the thick leather handles to me with a reassuring, knowing smile. "You will absolutely stop the show tomorrow evening, Miss Montgomery," he promised confidently. I thanked him gracefully, gripping the handles firmly, and turned to walk back out through the main showroom toward the heavy glass doors of the Fifth Avenue exit. My path to the door took me directly past the bridal section of the massive boutique. As I rounded a display of imported lace veils, a highly familiar, painfully shrill voice suddenly shattered the peaceful quiet of the luxury store. "I demand another glass of champagne right now," the voice complained loudly, "and tell your seamstress that this train is completely unacceptable. My father is Richard Thornton, and he expects absolute perfection for my wedding." I stopped dead in my tracks, my entire body tensing as I instantly recognized the entitled whining. I slowly turned my head toward the massive floor-to-ceiling mirrors of the central bridal pedestal. Standing there, draped in a ridiculously oversized, heavily ruffled white wedding dress that looked more like a frosted cake than a piece of high fashion, was Penelope. Sitting on a plush velvet sofa directly across from her, sipping aggressively from a crystal champagne flute, was Garrett's mother, Deanna. Pure, incredible coincidence had placed us in the exact same luxury boutique on the exact same morning. Penelope was clearly using her father's rapidly vanishing wealth to rush her dream wedding, desperate to lock down Garrett before anyone realized his entire financial portfolio was built on federal fraud. Deanna was wearing an overly bright floral dress, nodding along eagerly to every single demanding complaint Penelope made, playing the role of the perfectly supportive future mother-in-law to the billionaire daughter she had always craved. I kept my head lowered slightly, hoping to quietly slip past them and exit the store without causing an unnecessary scene. I had absolutely no desire to engage with their petty drama when I was less than 36 hours away from destroying their entire lives on a global stage. I quickened my pace, keeping the large garment bag shielded against my side. But the heavy brass buckle of my leather purse accidentally clipped the side of a glass display table, making a sharp, highly noticeable clinking sound. Penelope immediately stopped her loud complaining and snapped her head in my direction, her eyes narrowing sharply as she processed my face, her expression instantly twisting from bridal joy into a mask of pure, vicious malice. "Well, well, well," Penelope practically shouted, stepping awkwardly off the bridal pedestal and dragging yards of expensive white lace across the showroom floor. "Look who decided to show her pathetic face in public." Deanna nearly choked on her expensive champagne, slamming her crystal flute down onto the glass table and jumping to her feet. Both women marched aggressively toward me, completely ignoring the horrified gasps of the boutique staff. Before I could reach the heavy brass handles of the front door, Penelope threw her body directly into my path, physically blocking the exit. She crossed her arms over her corseted chest, staring down her nose at me with absolute disgust. "Are you so completely obsessed with my new life with Garrett that you followed me all the way to Fifth Avenue just to ruin my private bridal fitting? Do you have some serious mental issues?" Deanna chimed in immediately, rushing to stand shoulder to shoulder with Penelope, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my face. "I always knew you were a jealous, unstable woman. Garrett is finally happy. He's marrying a woman of true class and extraordinary wealth, and you simply cannot stand it. You're stalking us because you have absolutely nothing else going on in your miserable, empty little life." The utter delusion radiating off both of them was almost comical to witness up close. They were aggressively, furiously defending a life built entirely on stolen money and fragile, borrowed lies. I stood my ground, gripping the leather handles of my expensive garment bag a little tighter, and refused to let them see even a single fraction of an inch of intimidation. The sales associates hovered nervously in the background, clearly unsure how to handle the sudden, explosive confrontation unfolding right in the middle of their elite, hushed store. Penelope took eye-rocketed as Penelope reached out, attempting to forcefully snatch the bag right out of my hands. I smoothly took a half step backward, allowing her greedy, perfectly manicured hands to grasp absolutely nothing but empty air. The sudden momentum sent her stumbling awkwardly in her heavy, ruffled bridal gown, her expensive heels slipping dangerously on the polished marble floor. "How dare you try to touch my personal property?" I stated loudly, my voice carrying a sharp, commanding edge that instantly froze the remaining sales associates in their tracks. Penelope caught her balance, her face flushing a deep, furious crimson. "Personal property?" she shrieked, pointing an accusing, trembling finger at the prestigious golden logo printed on the opaque garment bag. "You don't have the money to buy a single thread in this elite store, Audrey. Garrett completely cut off your pathetic little allowance. The only way you could possibly afford a custom piece from Antoine's private collection is if you drained his corporate accounts before he permanently froze your joint checking. You're a common thief. You stole my future husband's hard-earned money to buy yourself a pathetic little revenge dress." Deanna nodded aggressively in agreement, stepping up to loudly flank Penelope. "She's absolutely right," Deanna sneered, addressing the growing crowd of wealthy patrons who had stopped browsing their racks to watch the unfolding drama unfold in real time. "This woman is a bitter, unemployed gold digger who just signed a zero-asset divorce settlement because she knows she's completely worthless. She's illegally hiding marital funds and trying to parade around Fifth Avenue like she belongs here." Penelope turned her attention away from me and focused her pure, unhinged rage directly on Antoine, the highly sophisticated boutique manager who had quietly stepped out from the VIP suite to observe the commotion. "Antoine," Penelope demanded, clapping her hands together aggressively like a spoiled toddler commanding a servant. "I demand that you confiscate that garment bag immediately. She purchased that dress with stolen funds. My father is Richard Thornton. He is a platinum VIP client here, and he will have this entire store shut down by the end of the week if you do not comply with my direct orders right now. Throw this jobless trash out onto the street where she belongs, and give me the dress to compensate for my severe emotional distress." Antoine stopped several feet away from the angry bridal party. He was a man who had spent 3 decades navigating the extreme egos of the global billionaire class, and he did not look intimidated by Penelope's loud threats in the slightest. In fact, he looked profoundly bored by her pathetic display of new money entitlement. "I'm afraid there has been a severe misunderstanding, miss," Antoine said, his voice dropping to a dangerously calm, professional whisper that cut through Penelope's screaming like a freshly sharpened knife. "I will not be confiscating anything from this esteemed client." Penelope let out an outraged gasp, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief. "Excuse me," she yelled, taking a threatening step toward the manager. "Did you not just hear me tell you exactly who my father is? I will have your job. I will ruin your entire career." Antoine clasped his hands neatly behind his back, maintaining a perfectly unbothered posture. "I am fully aware of who Richard Thornton is," he replied smoothly, entirely unbothered by her volume. "And I am also fully aware that this specific bespoke garment was paid for in full, directly through a private, highly verified family trust account that has absolutely nothing to do with Mr. Garrett or his mid-level corporate salary. The dress legally belongs to Miss Montgomery. Now, I must kindly ask you to lower your voice and step away from her immediately, or I will be forced to call building security to have you physically removed from the bridal showroom for harassing our top-tier clientele." The absolute dismissal in Antoine's tone was devastating. Penelope's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out at all. Her entire worldview, built entirely on the assumption that her father's name was an unstoppable golden ticket, had just violently crashed into an impenetrable brick wall of actual established power. She looked completely humiliated in front of the entire boutique, staring blankly as the wealthy patrons began to whisper and point at her ruined bridal fitting. But while Penelope was temporarily paralyzed by the shock of public rejection, Deanna was rapidly descending into pure, blinding rage. Hearing that the dress was fully paid for through a mysterious private trust only fueled her deeply ingrained delusion further. In Deanna's twisted, greedy mind, any money or asset I possessed automatically belonged to her, by right of her son's marriage, regardless of the source or the newly signed divorce papers sitting in some lawyer's briefcase. "That's a blatant lie," Deanna screamed, her face contorting into an ugly, hateful sneer. "She doesn't have a family trust. Her parents are broke, pathetic nobodies from Ohio. She's laundering Garrett's money through some fake account. Since they're still legally married until the judge stamps the paperwork, every single asset she holds belongs directly to my son, and by extension, it belongs to his rightful family." Deanna did not wait for security to arrive. She completely lost whatever tiny shred of sanity and public decorum she had left. Emboldened by her own toxic greed and desperate to prove her loyalty to Penelope, the older woman lunged forward with terrifying, unexpected speed. Her hands, heavy with cheap fake gold rings, shot out aggressively toward the expensive garment bag tucked securely under my arm. She was fully determined to strip the $30,000 dress right out of my hands, intending to hand it over to Penelope as a twisted sort of wedding trophy to prove her devotion. The tense air in the high-end boutique suddenly shattered as Deanna's manicured nails violently hooked into the thick, opaque fabric of the protective cover, yanking it harshly downward with the full force of her aggressive body weight. A sickening sound echoed through the hushed showroom, the sharp, unmistakable sound of premium silk ripping apart. The heavy zipper gave way under her violent assault, exposing the delicate midnight black fabric inside. Deanna's cheap rings caught on the intricate onyx beading of the bodice, tearing a 6-inch jagged hole straight through the outer layer of the custom $30,000 gown. Beads scattered across the polished marble floor like tiny drops of black rain, clattering into the dead silence of the room. I did not scream. I did not engage in some undignified physical tug-of-war. Instead, I smoothly took a large step backward, allowing Deanna to stumble forward under her own reckless momentum. She nearly face-planted into a display of imported bridal veils, clutching the torn fabric in her shaking hands, chest heaving. A twisted smile of malicious satisfaction slowly formed on her lips as she surveyed the damage she had wrought. Her triumph lasted for exactly 2 seconds. I calmly reached into the pocket of my blazer and raised my mobile phone right up to eye level. The screen was brilliantly illuminated, and a bright red recording timer was actively counting upward, steady and patient. It had been running since the exact moment Penelope first opened her entitled mouth in the showroom. I made sure the high-definition camera captured Deanna's unhinged face, the torn silk hanging from her hands, and the scattered onyx beads littering the floor in every damning detail. The twisted smile instantly melted off Deanna's face, replaced by a terrifying realization of what she had just done. She dropped the torn fabric as if it had suddenly caught fire. "You were recording me?" She gasped loudly, her voice trembling as she took a frightened step backward. "It's illegal to film someone without their explicit permission." I lowered the phone slightly, keeping the camera squarely aimed at her terrified face. "We're standing in a public retail showroom, Deanna," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "I don't need your permission to document a violent, unprovoked assault and the malicious destruction of my private property." The blood completely drained from Deanna's face, leaving her looking pale and sickly under the boutique lights. She frantically looked over her shoulder at Penelope, silently begging the billionaire's daughter to use her supposed power to fix the massive mistake unfolding around them. But Penelope was frozen solid, her eyes locked helplessly onto the glowing red recording icon on my screen. "You attacked me in a public space," I continued methodically, making sure the microphone captured every single word clearly. "You forcibly grabbed my belongings and completely destroyed a custom couture gown. I'm sure the police will find this extremely interesting." Deanna puffed out her chest, trying desperately to muster some kind of fake tough exterior to hide her rapidly escalating panic. "You wouldn't dare call the police on your own mother-in-law," she yelled, though her voice shook violently with every word. "The dress is marital property anyway. I have every legal right to take it for my son. Garrett will have his expensive lawyers completely destroy you if you try to press charges." I let out a dry, humorless laugh that made her visibly flinch. "I'm not married to your son anymore, Deanna, and that dress is not marital property. It's legally owned by the Montgomery Global Corporate Trust. Furthermore, the retail value of the garment you just maliciously destroyed is exactly $30,000. In the state of New York, destroying property valued over $250 elevates the crime from a simple misdemeanor straight to a severe felony." I watched her knees actually buckle slightly as the massive dollar figure registered somewhere deep in her greedy brain. "You just committed felony property damage on camera, Deanna. When I hand this high-definition video over to the authorities, you are not getting a slap on the wrist. You are going to be arrested, processed, and sent to a state penitentiary, and I highly doubt your precious son will be able to post your bail with his permanently frozen credit cards." Deanna started to hyperventilate, backing away toward the velvet sofa in a slow, unsteady retreat. Penelope finally snapped out of her shocked trance, stepping forward in her ridiculous white ruffles. "Don't listen to her, Deanna," Penelope shrieked defensively. "She's bluffing. She's a nobody. My father will hire the best defense team in the city to protect you. She can't touch us." I turned my attention away from the hyperventilating older woman and focused my cold stare entirely on Penelope. I walked slowly across the scattered black beads, the sharp click of my heels cutting through the heavy silence of the room. Penelope tried to stand her ground, but her false confidence crumbled visibly the closer I got. I stopped when I was uncomfortably close to her, deliberately invading her personal space. The overwhelming scent of her expensive perfume was nauseating up close. I leaned in, lowering my voice to a terrifying, lethal whisper that only she and the high-definition microphone on my phone could hear. "Your father can't protect anyone, Penelope," I said softly. "Your father can't even protect himself." Penelope blinked rapidly, her perfectly manicured hands trembling against the heavy white lace of her bridal gown. "What are you talking about?" she demanded nervously, her voice cracking under the immense weight of my absolute certainty. I looked her directly in the eyes, letting her see the complete, undeniable destruction that was rapidly approaching her perfect little life. I want you to really enjoy playing dress up today, Penelope, I whispered. I want you to twirl around in your expensive white gown and pretend you're the absolute queen of high society. Because tomorrow night, at the Montgomery Gala, the Thornton name permanently ceases to be a symbol of extreme wealth. Tomorrow night, the Thornton name becomes a federal crime. I did not wait for her to respond. I did not wait for the color to fully drain from her face, or for the sheer terror to properly register in her wide, frightened eyes. I simply stepped back, picked up the torn garment bag from Antoine, who was already securing the damaged gown with a sympathetic nod, and turned my back on both of them entirely. I walked straight toward the heavy brass doors of the Fifth Avenue exit and did not look back as I pushed through the glass, stepping out into the crisp New York air. Behind me, the boutique fell completely silent, leaving two arrogant, delusional women absolutely paralyzed by the creeping, inescapable dread that their entire world was about to violently collapse in on itself. The following evening, at precisely 7 o'clock, the exterior of the Plaza Hotel transformed into a blinding sea of flashing cameras and velvet ropes. The Montgomery Global Gala was the undisputed crown jewel of the New York financial season. A red carpet stretched from Fifth Avenue up the marble steps, flanked by dozens of aggressive reporters and photographers, desperately shouting for attention over one another. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the electric hum of immense, concentrated wealth. A black limousine pulled up, and the paparazzi immediately surged forward against the barricades. Richard Thornton stepped out first, projecting the arrogant aura of a real estate mogul at the peak of his power. He buttoned his custom tuxedo and turned to offer his hand to his daughter. Penelope emerged wearing a heavy emerald green gown, her face plastered with a highly manufactured smile for the cameras. She had spent the entire day burying the terror I had planted, diving headfirst into a comfortable, willful denial. Garrett stepped out of the vehicle right behind her, looking incredibly smug in his fitted designer tuxedo. He wrapped his arm around Penelope, pulling her close to present the image of the perfect power couple to the assembled press. The reporters shoved their microphones over the velvet ropes, shouting questions about the massive, highly rumored business deal. "Mr. Thornton!" a journalist yelled over the chaotic crowd. "Can you confirm the rumors about the $200 million joint venture between Thornton Holdings and Montgomery Global?" Richard smiled greedily, soaking in the media attention like sunlight. "I can absolutely confirm we are finalizing a historic partnership this evening," Richard boomed into the microphones. "Thornton Holdings is about to revolutionize commercial real estate on the East Coast. I am incredibly proud to announce my future son-in-law, Garrett, will be taking the helm as executive director of this massive venture." Garrett puffed out his chest, stepping forward to address the press directly. "It's a new era of wealth and innovation," Garrett lied smoothly, flashing his practiced corporate smile at the cameras. "We are deeply honored that Chairman Charles Montgomery personally recognized our visionary leadership. Tonight, we officially join the billionaire class." Trailing behind the trio, desperately trying to squeeze into the frame of the cameras, was Deanna. She had absolutely no business being on a red carpet of this elite magnitude, but she walked with the extreme confidence of a newly crowned queen. She wore a brightly colored, overly sequined dress that violently clashed with the elegant black tie formality of the evening. Around her neck hung thick, fake cubic zirconia jewelry she aggressively tried to pass off as diamonds. She paused every few feet to strike dramatic poses for photographers who were actively trying to look past her to capture the actual billionaires behind her. "Oh, please make sure you get my good side," Deanna loudly instructed a confused freelance photographer, adjusting her cheap necklace with theatrical care. "I'm the mother of the new executive director. My highly successful son is the mastermind behind this entire multi-million-dollar merger. We're practically part of the Montgomery family now." She scoffed loudly at a hotel staff member who accidentally stepped too close to her trailing hemline, snapping her fingers at him to back away. "Watch where you're going, you incompetent fool," she sneered, fully embracing the toxic persona of untouchable old money she had never actually earned. She hurried to catch up with Garrett and Penelope, desperate to soak in their borrowed fame before stepping through the golden doors. They were a pathetic trio of absolute frauds, parading their stolen wealth and empty promises in front of the entire world, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet was already crumbling into dust beneath the surface. While the Thornton party performed their circus act on the public red carpet, my arrival was entirely different in every way. My private town car slipped quietly into the heavily guarded subterranean VIP parking structure beneath the hotel, a discreet entrance strictly reserved for the Montgomery family and the highest-ranking members of the Global Executive Board. I stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward the private elevators. Thanks to Antoine and his dedicated seamstresses, who had worked through the night without complaint, the torn silk from yesterday had been completely replaced. The custom black gown was flawless once again, the heavy onyx beads catching the dim light with every step I took. I stepped into the private elevator and rode it directly up to the mezzanine level overlooking the grand ballroom. When the heavy brass doors finally slid open, I walked out onto the landing and looked down at the massive, glittering event below. Thousands of crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the absolute elite of Wall Street, gathered in one gleaming room. I slowly descended the grand, sweeping staircase into the main room, moving with the quiet, undeniable authority of a woman who actually owned the entire building beneath her feet. Across the massive sea of tailored suits and expensive evening gowns, Garrett was standing near the central ice sculpture, holding a glass of premium champagne and laughing loudly at some joke Richard Thornton had just made. As he turned his head to scan the room for more important hands to shake, his eyes suddenly locked directly onto mine. I watched the arrogant, practiced smile instantly fall completely off his face. The expensive champagne flute in his hand tipped slightly, spilling cold liquid over his polished shoes. Pure, absolute panic washed over his features in an instant. In his twisted, paranoid mind, he genuinely believed I had snuck past the velvet ropes to crash the gala, cause a massive public scene, and beg him to take me back. He thought I was there to ruin his reputation by screaming about his affair in front of his future billionaire business partners. He aggressively shoved his half-empty glass onto a passing waiter's silver tray and frantically began waving his hands, signaling for the massive Plaza Hotel venue security guards stationed near the entrance. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me, loudly ordering the large men in black suits to intercept my path and physically throw me out of the building immediately. 4 men in black suits and earpieces responded to Garrett's frantic gestures, weaving through the crowd of billionaires and forming a tight circle around me. Conversation died down instantly as curious onlookers turned to watch the developing scene. I stood perfectly still, radiating the absolute authority of a woman who owned the marble beneath her own feet. Garrett stormed across the ballroom floor right behind the guards, his face a twisted mask of sheer panic and uncontrollable rage. His tuxedo was stained with spilled champagne, ruining his carefully manufactured image for the night. Penelope hurried behind him, glaring daggers at me. "What are you doing here?" Garrett hissed, the veins in his neck visibly bulging with rage. "This is a highly exclusive, invite-only corporate event. You are completely unhinged, Audrey. Are you stalking us now? Did you actually think you could sneak past the ropes and crash the most important night of my career to beg? Get her out of here immediately," he barked, turning his attention to the largest security guard. "She's trespassing. She has absolutely no business being inside this hotel." The lead guard took a heavy step forward, raising his large hand toward my arm. "Sir, we'll handle this," the guard stated in a deep, even voice. Garrett scoffed loudly. Handle it aggressively, he demanded. Don't just walk her out. Drag her out the back exit and call the local precinct. My future father-in-law is Richard Thornton, and he is the primary guest of honor tonight. If you let this woman ruin his evening, he will personally ensure every single one of you loses your job by tomorrow morning. Penelope nodded aggressively in agreement, leaning against Garrett's arm. She's a dangerous stalker. Penelope lied smoothly to the security team, playing the delicate victim with practiced ease. She assaulted my future mother-in-law yesterday at a boutique. Please get her away from me before she does something violent. The lead guard reached out his thick fingers, inches from the delicate silk of my custom sleeve. Before he could make physical contact, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the heavy tension like a blade. Take one more step toward her, and you will be blacklisted from private security forever. Everyone froze instantly. The crowd parted slightly, and Malik Washington stepped smoothly into the center of the confrontation. He looked absolutely magnificent. He wore an immaculate, tailored midnight blue tuxedo that made Garrett's expensive suit look like a cheap rental by comparison. Pinned securely to Malik's lapel was a solid gold VIP access badge, exclusively reserved for the highest-level executives managing the gala. Malik did not so much as glance at Garrett or Penelope. He locked eyes directly with the lead security guard. "Stand down immediately," Malik ordered, his tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation of any kind. The security guards hesitated for a fraction of a second, recognizing instantly the supreme authority of the golden badge gleaming on his lapel. They swiftly took 2 large steps backward, completely releasing the tight circle they had formed around me. Garrett stared at his brother-in-law in pure, unadulterated shock, his mouth hanging open, his eyes darting wildly between Malik's confident face and the VIP badge catching the light of the crystal chandeliers. "Malik, what the hell are you doing here?" Garrett demanded, his confusion quickly morphing back into extreme anger. "Did you sneak in through the kitchen? You're a mid-level lawyer. You do not belong at a Montgomery Global Executive Gala. Tell these guards to do their jobs and throw my crazy ex-wife out into the street." Malik adjusted his silk cuffs, completely unbothered by Garrett's escalating volume and visible fury. "I'm not sneaking anywhere, Garrett," Malik replied calmly. "I am the lead auditing attorney representing Montgomery Global for tonight's corporate proceedings. I'm here to personally oversee the financial integrity of the joint venture announcements." Garrett let out a loud, obnoxious bark of laughter. A desperate sound, the noise of a man clinging frantically to his dying delusions. "Lead auditing attorney," Garrett mocked, pointing a trembling finger at Malik. "You really expect me to believe that the mysterious billionaire chairman hired a diversity hire from some second-rate firm to oversee a $200 million deal? You're completely pathetic, Malik. You printed yourself a fake badge just to come here and try to help Audrey ruin my night." Garrett stepped aggressively into Malik's personal space, trying to use his height to physically intimidate his sister's husband. "I'm going to have you both thrown in a police cruiser tonight," Garrett threatened, his breath thick with alcohol and rising panic. "When Richard Thornton finds out you impersonated a corporate officer to crash his party, he will have you disbarred. You will never practice law in this state again. Now get out of my way before I have the guards remove you too." Malik did not flinch. He did not step back so much as an inch. He simply looked at Garrett with a chilling mixture of extreme pity and absolute disgust, standing tall as the brilliant lights of the ballroom reflected in his sharp, intelligent eyes. "You are entirely blinded by your own toxic arrogance, Garrett," Malik stated, his voice completely devoid of any warmth whatsoever. "You spent years insulting my intelligence, my race, and my background, because you needed to feel superior to someone. You stole millions of dollars to build a fake empire because you were too weak and too lazy to ever earn it yourself. And now you're standing here threatening me with a billionaire who is about to lose absolutely everything he has." Garrett scowled, his face turning an ugly shade of crimson. "You don't know what you're talking about. I run this town." Malik smiled a slow, extremely dangerous smile that finally made Penelope take a nervous step backward. He looked past Garrett, his eyes sweeping across the massive, opulent ballroom filled with the most powerful people in the country. "No, Garrett, you don't run anything," Malik said, his voice dropping to a lethal, ice-cold whisper. "You're just a pathetic thief playing dress-up, and you have absolutely no idea whose floor you're standing on right now." Before Garrett could even formulate a response to Malik's devastating insult, the entire grand ballroom was suddenly plunged into absolute, pitch-black darkness. A collective gasp echoed through the massive crowd of elites. The frantic whispering ceased immediately, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. A single blinding white spotlight snapped on, cutting through the darkness and illuminating the center of the grand stage. The heavy velvet curtains parted, and a man stepped out into the brilliant light. It was Charles Montgomery. He was entirely unassuming in his physical stature, wearing a simple, flawlessly tailored black suit without a single flashy accessory, but the sheer raw power radiating from his quiet presence was absolutely undeniable to everyone in the room. The crowd erupted into thunderous, respectful applause. This was the man who controlled markets, moved global economies, and operated entirely from the shadows, rarely seen and rarely photographed. The elusive billionaire chairman had finally, publicly, revealed himself. Richard Thornton instantly shoved his way to the front of the stage, practically vibrating with greedy anticipation. He aggressively pushed past several high-ranking executives, dragging Penelope along by the wrist without a shred of grace. Garrett scrambled right behind them, his face still pale from the confrontation with Malik, but his eyes wide with the desperate hope that this massive business deal might still, somehow, save him from his rapidly closing financial ruin. Richard stood right at the very edge of the stage, nervously straightening his silk tie for what felt like the 10th time, his right hand already lifting eagerly into the air. He had rehearsed this exact moment in his head all week. The chairman's firm handshake, the blinding explosion of camera flashes, the historic $200 million joint venture that would finally hurl the Thornton name into the absolute stratosphere of American wealth, right alongside the oldest, most untouchable fortunes in the country. He could already picture the headlines. Charles Montgomery stepped up to the microphone stand positioned dead center of the stage, moving with the unhurried calm of a man who had never once needed to rush for anyone. He let his gaze drift slowly across the enormous sea of upturned faces, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd with the same clinical precision he used when reviewing a balance sheet for hidden fraud. He did not look at Richard Thornton. He did not so much as glance at the greedy, expectant hand hovering just below the edge of the stage, waiting to be shaken. Instead, the chairman raised his own hand in a single sharp motion, silently commanding the applause to die. The massive ballroom fell instantly, eerily silent, as if someone had physically switched off the sound. Charles turned deliberately away from the microphone and began descending the carpeted stairs that led down from the stage onto the main marble floor of the ballroom. The crowd parted naturally in front of him, almost reverently, like the Red Sea drawing back to open a wide, unobstructed path directly through the heart of the gathering. Richard Thornton awkwardly lowered his still-raised hand, a deep, ugly flush of humiliation crawling slowly up the back of his neck and into his ears. "Mr. Chairman?" Richard called out, his voice cracking slightly as he forced an unconvincing laugh. "We're right over here, sir." Charles ignored him completely, as though the man hadn't spoken a single word. He continued his slow, deliberate walk directly across the gleaming, polished marble, each footstep echoing faintly in the stunned silence. Garrett's heart began to slam violently against his ribs as he watched the billionaire walk straight past the front row of VIP tables, past the towering ice sculpture glittering under the chandeliers, and head purposefully toward the very back of the room. The spotlight tracked Charles's every movement with flawless precision, casting a brilliant, almost surgical beam of white light across the sea of stunned faces. Finally, the chairman stopped. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. Garrett let out a strangled, breathless gasp somewhere behind me. Penelope's hands flew up to cover her mouth in absolute shock. The entire room watched in frozen, disbelieving silence as the single most powerful man in American finance reached out and gently, warmly pulled me into a deep, affectionate embrace. "You look absolutely stunning tonight, sweetheart," my father whispered softly against my ear, his voice carrying all the unmistakable warmth of a parent who was overflowing with pride for his child. I smiled and hugged him back tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. "Thank you, Dad," I replied softly, my voice barely above a whisper. Charles Montgomery turned to face the massive crowd, keeping one arm securely wrapped around my shoulders as though he had no intention of ever letting go again. He gestured casually toward a nearby staff member, silently requesting a wireless microphone. The silence in the enormous room had grown so absolute, you could have heard a single pin drop onto the marble floor. Garrett was trembling so violently by this point that he had to physically lean his entire weight against Penelope just to keep himself from collapsing outright. My father raised the microphone slowly to his mouth, his eyes locking with cold, deliberate precision directly onto Garrett's pale, terrified face. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father's voice boomed effortlessly through the massive speaker system, echoing with undeniable, bone-deep authority. "Before we discuss any corporate business or any potential joint ventures tonight, there is one very important introduction I need to make." He paused there, letting the anticipation build and thicken in the air until it felt almost physically unbearable. "Many of you already know me as the chairman of Montgomery Global," he continued, his tone measured and deliberate. "But my most important title has always been kept quietly out of the public eye. Until tonight. Tonight, that changes for good. Let me introduce you to the true heart of my entire empire, the woman who holds the controlling shares of our family trust, my daughter, and the sole legal heir to the Montgomery dynasty, Audrey Montgomery." The silence that followed my father's declaration was a suffocating, absolute vacuum of sound, pressing down heavily on every single person crowded into that enormous ballroom. The breath of the assembled Wall Street elite seemed to have been stolen from their lungs all at once. Nobody moved. Nobody so much as coughed. The only sound that finally broke the crushing stillness was the sharp, brittle crash of crystal shattering against the polished marble floor. An expensive champagne flute slipped straight through Penelope's trembling fingers, exploding into hundreds of glittering shards scattered across the tile at her feet. She stared at me with wide, hollow eyes, her face completely drained of color, looking every bit like a ghost trapped inside a ridiculous, ill-fitting emerald green gown. The sheer magnitude of her fatal miscalculation was finally, mercilessly crushing her entire fabricated reality into dust. Beside her, Garrett experienced what could only be described as a total physical system failure. His arrogant, entitled posture simply evaporated on the spot. His legs lost every ounce of structural integrity, folding beneath his expensive tuxedo like cheap, crumpled paper. He dropped hard onto his knees right there on the gala floor, his jaw hanging slack, his chest heaving irregularly as his panicked brain desperately tried, and failed, to process the apocalyptic truth unfolding in front of him. The poor girl from Ohio he had relentlessly mocked, the wife he had so casually discarded for a perceived upgrade, was in fact the sole heir to the very billionaire empire he had been so desperately, pathetically trying to infiltrate. The ultimate prize he had chased his entire miserable life had been sleeping quietly in his own bed the whole time, and he had thrown her out into the freezing rain without a second thought. A few yards behind them, Deanna began to emit a thin, high-pitched wheezing sound. The older woman clutched at her heavily sequined chest, her cheap cubic zirconia necklaces digging painfully into the loose skin of her neck. She gasped frantically for air, her knees buckling beneath her as she slumped hard against a nearby VIP table, completely overwhelmed by the sudden, undeniable realization that her platinum health insurance and comfortable suburban lifestyle had just evaporated forever. Her son was not, and had never been, a self-made titan of industry. He was a colossal fool who had just single-handedly destroyed the single greatest asset their family had ever managed to touch. The sheer, crushing weight of their collective downfall felt like a tangible force pressing down on that room, pinning them all to the floor beneath the blinding white spotlight. They stood there completely paralyzed, utterly unable to tear their eyes away from the stage where I remained standing securely beside the most powerful man in their entire known universe. My father let the heavy, suffocating silence linger for several more agonizing seconds, deliberately ensuring that the absolute gravity of the moment was permanently seared into the memory of everyone present. When he finally raised the microphone back to his lips, the warm, affectionate tone he had used only moments earlier to introduce me had vanished completely. In its place was the lethal, uncompromising voice of a ruthless corporate executioner about to deliver a final verdict. Charles Montgomery did not become a billionaire by showing mercy to parasites, my father announced, his deep voice carrying a terrifying chill that rippled straight through the massive speaker system. As many of you already know, Montgomery Global was prepared to announce a historic $200 million joint venture here tonight. We evaluated the market carefully, and we extended a hand of good faith partnership. He paused again, his sharp eyes locking directly onto Richard Thornton, who was now visibly sweating straight through his custom-tailored tuxedo. However, my father continued, his voice rolling like distant thunder across the grand ballroom. Effective immediately, Montgomery Global is permanently severing all ties, all negotiations, and every existing contract with Thornton Holdings. A loud, disbelieving murmur of pure shock rippled instantly through the crowd of elite investors and corporate journalists, packed into the room. Cameras flashed wildly and relentlessly, capturing the historic real-time destruction of a massive real estate empire in a single unforgettable frame. "We do not do business with criminals," my father stated bluntly, delivering the final devastating blow with icy calm. Following a highly secure internal audit led by our legal team, we have uncovered severe breaches of financial ethics, rampant embezzlement, and coordinated wire fraud, orchestrated at the very highest levels of Thornton Holdings. Therefore, instead of a joint venture, Montgomery Global is officially initiating a hostile takeover of all Thornton assets in order to recover the stolen capital belonging to our private investors. By the time the markets open tomorrow morning, Thornton Holdings will cease to exist as an independent entity. The declaration landed like an absolute death sentence. It was not merely a canceled business deal, it was a total, public, and utterly irreversible annihilation. My father had just declared open season on Richard Thornton's entire legacy, publicly authorizing the complete dismemberment of his company right in front of the most powerful financial figures in the entire country. Reporters clustered at the back of the room scrambled instantly for their phones, frantically typing out breaking headlines that would dominate the global financial news cycle well before midnight. Richard Thornton stood completely frozen for a long, terrible moment, his mind racing desperately to comprehend the sudden, total destruction of his life's work. When the full reality of the hostile takeover and the public accusation of federal fraud finally registered, something inside him snapped. He spun around, His face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged fury and lunged directly at Garrett. "You worthless parasite!" Richard screamed at the top of his lungs, grabbing Garrett by the lapels of his tuxedo and shaking him violently back and forth. "You told me the accounts were secure. You ruined my company. You destroyed my family." Penelope shrieked, trying awkwardly to pull her enraged father off her kneeling fiancé. Garrett shoved the older man away with a burst of panicked strength, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He looked past Richard, past the flashing cameras, and locked his desperate gaze directly onto me. "Audrey, please," Garrett begged, his voice cracking pitifully as he scrambled forward on his hands and knees across the polished marble toward the stage. "Audrey, I am so sorry. You have to stop him. Tell your father I didn't mean it. We can fix this, please." He reached one shaking hand out toward the stairs, but he never made it any further. Malik Washington stepped forward with flawless, unhurried precision. With a single sharp gesture from Malik, 4 massive security guards descended on Garrett at once. They seized him firmly by the shoulders, physically blocking his pathetic attempt to reach the stage, and pinned the ruined man securely against the cold floor. I stepped forward, leaving the warm, protective embrace of my father behind. I reached out and gently took the wireless microphone directly from his hand. The heavy, gold-plated device felt strangely light in my grip, almost weightless compared to everything else in that room. I looked down at Garrett, who was now pinned flat against the cold marble by 4 massive guards, his expensive tuxedo completely ruined, his face pressed humiliatingly against the tile. He was crying softly, a broken, pathetic sound that carried absolutely no weight in that room anymore. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for him, not one. I turned my attention away from the sniveling coward at my feet and faced the silent, expectant crowd of Wall Street billionaires, corporate journalists, and elite investors. I raised my left hand and gestured toward the massive technical booth stationed at the far back of the grand ballroom. A single sharp nod from Malik Washington was all the confirmation I needed. Instantly, the state-of-the-art LED screen stretching across the entire back wall of the stage flashed brilliantly to life. The room was bathed in the harsh blue glow of the digital projectors. The crowd shifted slightly, clearly expecting to see the slick, highly produced marketing graphics and architectural renderings of the $200 million joint venture that Thornton Holdings had been aggressively promoting for months. Richard Thornton, still breathing heavily from his violent outburst, looked up at the screens with a flicker of desperate, foolish hope. Perhaps some part of him still believed this was all an elaborate psychological test, and that his presentation was finally about to begin. But the screens did not display gleaming commercial towers, rising profit charts, or optimistic market projections. Instead, they projected stark, undeniable reality. The massive digital displays flooded instantly with high-definition images of highly classified bank statements, detailed wire transfer logs, and a dense, sprawling web of forensic accounting records. The sheer scale of the financial documentation was staggering to behold. It was the exact, unredacted corporate espionage dossier that Malik had meticulously compiled and independently verified over the previous 48 hours. I watched as the collective eyes of the most powerful people in American finance darted rapidly across the glowing numbers, their sharp, highly analytical minds immediately recognizing the irrefutable patterns of illegal capital movement laid bare in front of them. The screen slowly scrolled through dozens of fake contractor invoices, artificially inflated material costs, and a series of dummy corporations quietly registered in the Cayman Islands. Richard Thornton let out a sharp, choked gasp. The color drained completely from his face as he stared at his own digital signature, boldly displayed beside a fraudulent $20 million offshore wire transfer. Penelope stared blankly at the screen, entirely lacking the basic financial literacy required to fully comprehend the complex spreadsheets, but fully understanding, on some primal level, the absolute horror radiating off her paralyzed father. Garrett stopped his pathetic crying altogether, twisting his neck awkwardly against the floor to look up at the massive screens, his eyes widening in pure, unfiltered terror as his own mid-level executive authorization codes were broadcast in massive, unforgiving font for the entire corporate world to meticulously scrutinize. I raised the microphone, and my voice cut cleanly through the stunned silence of the ballroom. What you are currently looking at, ladies and gentlemen, is the true legacy of Thornton Holdings, I announced clinically, walking slowly and deliberately across the front of the stage. For the past 3 years, Richard Thornton and his hand-picked executive director Garrett have been quietly operating a highly sophisticated, deeply malicious embezzlement ring. They did not build their fortune through visionary leadership or shrewd investments. They built it by systematically stealing directly from the very people standing in this room tonight. I clicked a small remote in my hand, and the screen transitioned smoothly to a highly detailed pie chart highlighting specific investment funds. I began, calmly and clinically, to break down the exact mechanics of their massive fraud, pointing to the screen as it tracked the flow of stolen capital. When Thornton Holdings secured the waterfront development project in Boston last year, they deliberately overreported the cost of raw materials by a staggering 40%. They generated fake invoices from phantom supply companies, companies that Garrett personally registered under an anonymous holding trust. They took the surplus investor capital, funneled it through a series of offshore accounts to launder the origin of the funds, and then quietly deposited it directly into Richard Thornton's private wealth portfolio. They treated your hard-earned investment capital as nothing more than their own personal slush fund, using it to finance their sprawling estates, their luxury vehicles, and their absurdly expensive weddings. A low, dangerous murmur of pure disgust began to ripple steadily through the elite crowd. These were not people who took kindly to being robbed. Several prominent investors seated in the front row, men and women who had personally poured tens of millions of dollars into Thornton projects, crossed their arms, their expressions hardening into masks of raw fury. One billionaire CEO pointed a trembling finger directly at Richard, whispering something harsh and clipped to his primary legal counsel. The murmurs grew steadily louder, shifting rapidly from shock into aggressive, demanding outrage. They were watching, in real time, their own hard-earned money being mapped out inside a criminal conspiracy. I clicked the remote one final time. The screen shifted to display a massive, undeniable summary of the stolen funds. The final number rested just north of $85 million. Every single wire transfer, every single fraudulent invoice, and every single unauthorized withdrawal carries the direct, verified digital signatures of both Richard and Garrett, I stated firmly, making certain the corporate journalists gathered at the back of the room recorded every single devastating word. Montgomery Global will not allow parasites to infect our financial ecosystem. The hostile takeover we are initiating tonight exists strictly to secure the remaining assets, so that our partners can be properly and fully reimbursed. Richard Thornton stumbled backward, nearly collapsing into a chair at the nearest VIP table. He clutched at his chest, his breathing shallow and rapid, and looked desperately around the room, making frantic eye contact with men he had called friends and business partners barely an hour earlier. But every single face staring back at him now was filled with lethal, unmasked contempt. Nobody stepped forward to help him. Nobody offered even a single word in his defense. In that exact crushing moment, the full reality of his situation finally crashed down on top of him. He was not merely facing bankruptcy, he was staring directly at undeniable, meticulously documented proof of a massive federal crime. Richard Thornton suddenly, viscerally understood that he was going to spend the rest of his natural life inside a federal penitentiary. Before the rising murmurs of the elite crowd could fully escalate into outright chaos, a deafening sound echoed from the far end of the grand ballroom. The massive brass doors at the main entrance were thrown violently open, crashing hard against the marble walls. The entire room went dead silent once again. Striding purposefully through the entrance was a highly coordinated team of over 24 federal agents, dressed in dark suits and tactical windbreakers, boldly emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the FBI and the SEC. They moved with terrifying, absolute precision, ignoring the gasps of the assembled billionaires and socialites as they marched directly down the center aisle toward the stage. The lead agent, a tall woman with a steely, unreadable expression, held up a federal warrant as she approached. Richard Thornton did not even attempt to run. He sat frozen in his chair, his face slick with cold sweat, as two agents moved to flank him on either side. "Richard Thornton," the lead agent announced, her voice carrying easily and coldly across the silent room. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and federal money laundering." An agent hauled Richard roughly to his feet, twisting his arms firmly behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around the billionaire's wrists echoed loudly through the ballroom. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent continued clinically, reading through the Miranda rights as Richard slumped forward in total, complete defeat. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Simultaneously, a second team of federal agents descended on Garrett. Malik's private security team smoothly stepped back, handing the ruined man directly over to federal custody. Garrett sobbed uncontrollably as two agents hauled him upright from the floor by his armpits. "Please," Garrett wailed, tears streaming down his face and mixing with the dirt smeared across his cheek. "I was just following orders. Richard made me do it. I'll cooperate. I'll tell you everything you want to know." His pathetic last-ditch attempt to betray his future father-in-law earned him nothing but a harsh, dismissive shove forward. "Garrett, you are also under arrest for federal wire fraud and financial conspiracy," the arresting officer stated flatly, tightening the handcuffs until they bit sharply into Garrett's wrists. He recited the Miranda rights over the sound of Garrett's loud, desperate weeping. The elite crowd of Wall Street titans watched the entire scene unfold in absolute fascination. Nobody intervened. They simply stood and observed the violent public execution of a once untouchable fraudulent empire. As the reality of federal prison finally sank in, Penelope completely snapped. The delicate, spoiled socialite facade she had worn her entire life shattered violently into 1,000 pieces. She looked at her father, now being marched away in disgrace. She looked at the flashing LED screens still displaying the irrefutable evidence of their stolen wealth. And then she looked at Garrett. With a sudden, unhinged shriek of pure rage, Penelope lunged forward, throwing her entire body weight at Garrett before the federal agents could pull him fully away. She raised her hand and slapped him across the face with such extreme force that the crack of it split through the air like a gunshot. "You ruined my entire life!" Penelope screamed hysterically, her face contorted into an ugly mask of pure hatred. "You promised me we were going to be billionaires. You told me you were a genius. You're nothing but a pathetic, incompetent thief. My wedding is destroyed. My reputation is completely dead. I hate you." Garrett flinched, trying uselessly to shield his face with his cuffed hands, crying harder as Penelope continued screaming insults at him. Two FBI agents quickly grabbed Penelope by the shoulders, pulling her forcefully away from the sobbing man. Realizing that her fury was accomplishing absolutely nothing, Penelope's frantic eyes darted wildly around the room until they locked directly onto me. The sheer malice draining instantly from her expression, replaced by a desperate, pathetic panic. She violently ripped her arm free from the agent's grip and tried to sprint toward the edge of the stage where I stood. "Audrey, please," Penelope begged, her voice pitching upward into a hysterical whine. "You have to tell them I had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. I didn't know they were stealing money. I'm just an innocent bystander in all of this. You have the power to stop it. Tell your father to drop the charges. Please, I'll do anything you ask." She never made it to the stairs. A female FBI agent easily intercepted her, seizing Penelope firmly by the wrist and twisting it expertly behind her back. Penelope shrieked in pain and outrage. "Let go of me," she demanded, reverting instantly back to her entitled, imperious persona. "Do you have any idea who I am? You cannot touch me." The agent calmly pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "We know exactly who you are, Penelope," the agent said coldly, snapping the steel bracelets tightly around her delicate wrists. "And you are not an innocent bystander. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit financial extortion and unlawful tampering with a federally insured banking institution." Penelope froze, her eyes widening in absolute horror. "The illegal freezing of the joint asset account was formally authorized using your own digital signature," the agent explained loudly, deliberately ensuring the entire room heard every word of the charges. "You conspired with a corrupt bank manager to illegally restrict marital assets. You have the right to remain silent." Penelope began to thrash violently, sobbing and screaming for her father to save her. But Richard was already being escorted out the door, completely broken and utterly unable to help anyone, least of all himself. The federal agents moved with swift, uncompromising efficiency, forming a tight perimeter around the three disgraced criminals and beginning the long, humiliating march out of the grand ballroom. The absolute silence of the room dissolved into the chaotic clicking of camera shutters as the corporate journalists captured every single second of the incredible, historic downfall. I stood tall on the stage, watching with cold, absolute detachment as Garrett, Penelope, and Richard were paraded through the center of the crowd. Garrett's head hung in total shame, his shoulders shaking with violent sobs as he was physically dragged toward the exit. The very men and women he had spent years desperately trying to impress now looked at him with nothing but pure, undiluted disgust. The doors of the ballroom swung open, leading out into the opulent lobby of the Plaza Hotel. But the nightmare for the Thornton family was far from over. The massive crowd of paparazzi who had been waiting outside for the joint venture announcement had already been tipped off by the sudden arrival of the FBI convoy. As the federal agents pushed through the main doors and dragged the three criminals out onto the red carpet, the night sky was instantly illuminated by hundreds of explosive camera flashes. Journalists shouted aggressive questions, demanding statements about the millions upon millions of stolen dollars. Garrett squeezed his eyes shut, turning his face away from the blinding lights, completely humiliated in front of the entire watching world. Penelope tried to hide her tear-streaked face behind her messy blonde hair, struggling uselessly against her handcuffs as her expensive emerald dress dragged through the dirty puddles collecting on the sidewalk. They were shoved roughly into the backs of three separate unmarked federal vehicles. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing their absolute doom. The sirens wailed loudly, cutting sharply through the crisp New York air as the vehicles pulled away from the curb, leaving the shattered remains of their fake, arrogant lives permanently behind them. As the heavy brass doors of the grand ballroom slowly swung shut, muffling the chaotic shouts of the paparazzi still gathered outside, the attention of the elite crowd turned back toward the brilliantly lit stage. I stood perfectly still beneath the bright white spotlight, letting the heavy reality of the swift federal execution settle fully over the massive room. Before my father could reclaim the microphone to officially conclude the dramatic evening, a sudden, frantic, scrambling noise violently broke the silence. Deanna, who had been leaning weakly against a VIP table clutching her chest, suddenly burst forward. Her bright, overly sequined dress rustled loudly as she abandoned whatever last shred of dignity she still possessed. She practically crawled up the carpeted stairs of the stage, her heavy makeup running down her pale face in dark, ugly streaks. "Audrey, please!" Deanna sobbed hysterically, throwing herself violently at my feet in front of the entire assembled financial world. She grabbed the hem of my custom black silk gown with shaking, heavily ringed hands. "You have to help him. You have to save my son. He's going to die in a federal prison." I looked down at the pathetic, groveling woman clinging desperately to my shoes. This was the exact same woman who, barely 24 hours earlier, had violently attacked me inside a Fifth Avenue boutique, torn my expensive dress, and proudly called me a worthless gold digger to my face. Now she was weeping uncontrollably, burying her tear-streaked face against my ankles. "We're still family, Audrey," Deanna wailed loudly, trying desperately to meet my eyes with a look of pleading. "You were my daughter for 4 years. I know you have a good heart underneath all this. You have all this money now. Your father is a billionaire. You can afford to hire the absolute best defense attorneys in the entire country. You can pay his bail tonight. You have to fix this for him." I slowly reached down and firmly pried her desperate fingers off the delicate fabric of my gown. I took a deliberate step backward, removing myself entirely from her toxic reach. "We are absolutely not family, Deanna," I stated coldly, my voice ringing out clearly across the silent ballroom. "And I will not spend a single penny of my family's wealth to save your corrupt son. Did you completely forget about the aggressive divorce settlement he forced me to sign yesterday morning at his fancy Manhattan law firm?" Deanna gasped loudly, her eyes widening in pure confusion. "He demanded that I sign away all of my rights to his assets," I explained methodically, making certain the entire crowd understood the brilliant legal trap laid out before them. He wanted to leave me with absolutely nothing, but his arrogant lawyer was far too lazy to actually read the fine print. I quietly altered the post-nuptial liability clause before I signed the document. I permanently indemnified myself from any and all of Garrett's pending criminal and financial liabilities. He officially took the entire fall completely alone. I am not legally, financially, or morally tied to your son ever again." Deanna let out a devastated, breathless wail, finally realizing that her son had, quite literally, signed his own undeniable death warrant with his own hand. I turned my back on Deanna in absolute disgust. With a subtle nod from my father, 2 venue security guards swiftly ascended the stairs. They grabbed Deanna by her arms, lifting her unceremoniously off the floor, and dragged her sobbing, kicking form out of the ballroom through a side exit. The room felt instantly cleaner the moment she was finally gone. I turned to face the crowd of billionaires and investors once more, my posture completely relaxed, a genuine, warm smile finally breaking across my face for the first time all evening. "Now that the trash has been permanently taken out of the building," I announced into the microphone, my voice radiating pure confidence, "let's talk about the actual future of Montgomery Global. We do not just expose corporate criminals. We actively reward unparalleled integrity, fierce loyalty, and absolute brilliance." I extended my free hand toward the side of the stage. "I would like to call Malik Washington up here to join me." The crowd parted respectfully as Malik stepped forward. He walked up the stairs with the quiet, undeniable dignity of a man who had just orchestrated the flawless legal takedown of a massive financial syndicate. He stood beside me, adjusting his tailored midnight blue tuxedo, looking completely at home on a stage meant for global titans. Malik did not just uncover the massive wire fraud you all witnessed tonight. I told the captivated audience. He risked his entire professional career to stand up against blatant racism, severe classism, and deep corporate corruption. He protected this firm's assets when nobody else even knew they were in active danger. He is exactly the kind of brilliant legal mind that Montgomery Global desperately needs to navigate its future. I turned to Malik, handing him a sleek, heavy leather folder that my father had quietly brought onto the stage earlier. Malik, I said proudly, ensuring my voice reached every corner of the massive room. Effective immediately, the board of directors is formally appointing you as the new Global Chief Legal Officer of Montgomery Global. Inside that folder is a multi-million-dollar 10-year guaranteed contract. Malik stared down at the leather folder, visibly moved by the life-changing weight of the promotion. He opened it slowly, taking in the astronomical numbers printed across the heavy corporate stock paper. A sudden, piercing shriek of absolute joy erupted from the middle of the ballroom. It was Clara, Garrett's younger sister, and Malik's fiercely loyal wife. She was jumping up and down in her elegant evening gown, tears of pure happiness streaming down her face as she clapped wildly for her husband. The elite crowd immediately followed her lead. The room erupted into a massive, deafening standing ovation. Billionaire CEOs and ruthless Wall Street investors rose to their feet, clapping enthusiastically for the brilliant attorney who had just personally saved them millions of dollars in a single evening. Malik closed the folder, a wide, triumphant smile spreading across his handsome face. He stepped forward and wrapped me in a tight, brotherly hug. "Thank you, Audrey," he whispered sincerely over the roar of applause. I hugged him back just as tightly. "No, Malik," I replied softly. "Thank you for never underestimating me." He pulled back and shook my father's hand firmly, while the flashing cameras of the remaining corporate photographers captured the powerful, historic moment for the front page of every financial paper in the country. The Thornton legacy was completely dead and buried in federal disgrace, but standing right there, under that brilliant white spotlight, our newly forged empire was just beginning its rise. The bright flashbulbs of the photographers faded slowly behind me as I finally walked out through the heavy brass doors of the Plaza Hotel. I stepped out into the crisp, cool New York night air, taking one deep, cleansing breath that felt, for the first time in 4 long years, entirely and genuinely my own. The chaotic energy of the city swirled restlessly around the grand entrance, but I felt nothing except absolute perfect peace settling into my chest. My father walked proudly beside me, his quiet presence a comforting anchor after the sheer dizzying madness of the evening. A sleek black armored limousine waited quietly at the curb, its engine humming low and smooth. A uniformed driver stepped forward at once, opening the heavy rear door with a respectful bow of his head. I slipped into the luxurious leather interior, and my father slid in right beside me. As the massive vehicle pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the flowing river of Manhattan traffic, I looked out through the tinted window at the glowing city skyline stretching endlessly above us. The overwhelming, suffocating weight of my toxic marriage had completely, finally vanished. For 4 agonizing years, I had deliberately shrunk myself down to fit inside Garrett's fragile, pathetic little world. I had hidden my massive wealth, silenced my sharp business instincts, and swallowed my own considerable pride, all just to soothe the fragile ego of a deeply insecure man. I had desperately wanted to believe that if I simply loved him enough, if I simply supported his dreams enough, he would eventually grow into the good man he had always pretended to be. But tonight had proven, once and for all, exactly what my father had always gently warned me about. You cannot build a solid foundation on a swamp of lies and entitlement. By stripping away my humble, quiet persona and stepping fully into the blinding spotlight of my true identity, I had not simply destroyed my enemies. I had permanently, irrevocably reclaimed myself. I was no longer Audrey, the supposedly poor, naive public servant's daughter from Ohio. I was Audrey Montgomery, sole heir to a billion-dollar global empire, and I would never again shrink myself down for the fragile comfort of an arrogant, deeply insecure man. My father reached over and patted my hand gently, offering a warm, silent smile of absolute approval. We drove on through the vibrant city streets, leaving the shattered wreckage of the Thornton legacy far behind us, heading steadily toward a bright, entirely unburdened future. The fallout from that historic night at the gala was swift, brutal, and thoroughly devastating. The federal justice system did not show a single ounce of mercy toward the arrogant men who had stolen tens of millions of dollars from powerful Wall Street investors. Following a highly publicized, deeply humiliating federal trial, Garrett was officially sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy. His once massive ego was permanently crushed behind cold steel bars. Richard Thornton received an identical 20-year sentence. His entire real estate empire was completely liquidated by the government in order to repay his furious investors. The Thornton name, once a symbol of immense, untouchable wealth throughout Connecticut, became an absolute toxic curse practically overnight. Penelope managed to narrowly avoid a lengthy prison sentence by accepting a devastating plea deal, but her precious high society life was thoroughly annihilated all the same. Her family was completely bankrupted by aggressive civil lawsuits and massive federal fines. She was permanently exiled from every country club, elite boutique, and luxury social circle on the entire East Coast. Without her father's stolen money to fund her delusions of grandeur, she was forced to move into a tiny, run-down apartment in a rough neighborhood, utterly unrecognizable from the spoiled socialite she used to be. Deanna suffered an equally harsh dose of reality. Because I had legally revoked her premium health insurance and canceled the massive auto-pay funding her comfortable suburban home, she defaulted on her mortgage almost immediately. The bank rapidly foreclosed on her beautiful house with the wraparound porch. Desperate, entirely broke, and completely abandoned by her imprisoned son, Deanna was forced to move into a cheap trailer park just to cover her basic living expenses and mounting medical debt. The deeply arrogant woman who had once mocked my supposedly poor parents was forced to take a grueling minimum-wage job scanning groceries at a local discount supermarket. They all got exactly what they deserved, completely and thoroughly destroyed by the very same greed and vicious entitlement they had so proudly weaponized against me. I, however, fully embraced my rightful place within Montgomery Global. Working alongside my father and Malik, we expanded our massive corporate empire, building a legacy firmly rooted in absolute integrity and ruthless efficiency. The fake, superficial life I had once lived in Greenwich felt now like a distant, bizarre nightmare, half-remembered and entirely foreign. I was finally free, entirely independent, and completely untouchable. Sometimes letting people completely believe you have absolutely nothing is the single best, most effective way to see exactly who they truly are. When you remove the shiny allure of money, social status, and powerful connections, you force people to reveal their raw, unfiltered character. For better or, far more often, for worse. Garrett, Penelope, and Deanna all looked at my perceived poverty and saw nothing but a convenient opportunity for vicious cruelty and blatant exploitation. They played a dangerous, arrogant game against a woman they had entirely underestimated, and they burned their entire lives to the ground in the process. Have you ever had to set firm, unapologetic boundaries with toxic relatives who only ever loved you for exactly what they could aggressively take from you? Have you ever had someone look completely down on you, only to eventually realize they were playing with fire the entire time? How did you reclaim your own power and walk away from their manipulation for good? Let me know your personal stories of sweet revenge and quiet triumph in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about navigating toxic families, discovering your true worth, and delivering absolute unapologetic justice.